He never raised his voice, never picked a fight, just a quiet boy from the edge of town who spent more time with horses than people. But when a wild Mustang broke loose in the arena and no one else dared step forward, he did. What happened next didn't just tame a legend. It cracked the foundation of an entire town, built on power, fear, and silence. The wind in Summit Hollow always carried dust and judgment. It scraped through the cracked roads and old barn slats, curling into corners where secrets settled and kindness never lasted long. Folks here didn't trust silence. They trusted calloused hands, raised voices, and people who earned respect the hard way, loud, fast, and without apology. Eli Navaro didn't fit. He lived on the outskirts, in a leaning ranch house with more splinters than paint and fences held together by hope and baling wire. The land was dry, stubborn, like the town, like the people. But Eli never tried to change any of it. He just moved through the days quietly, caring for what little they had left. A few chickens, 3 aging horses, and his grandfather Walter, who spoke more with nods than words. Eli had been 10 when his parents died. No drama, just a truck on the wrong side of a mountain curve. Since then, it had been just him and Walter. The boy didn't make friends, didn't raise his voice. He read old vet manuals by lantern light, memorized the rhythms of hoofbeats, and talked to animals like they were the only ones who listened. Maybe they were. People in town called him soft, not mean, just matter of fact, like describing the weather. That Navarro kid's sweet, but he ain't built for ranch life, they'd say over coffee, or while leaning against tailgates. Ain't got the bite in him. Eli heard it, all of it, but he never said a word. Never defended himself, not when the other boys laughed at his gentleness. Not when ranchers mocked the way he used whispers instead of ropes. And not when Colton Reeves, the wealthiest, meanest landowner in 3 counties, looked down his nose and said Eli's family was one more bad harvest away from being a ghost story. Eli just kept tending the animals. He didn't need to prove anything, not to them, but Walter worried. He'd seen the town eat boys like Eli alive, boys with hearts too open, voices too small, and hands that trembled before they clenched. He tried to toughen him, tried to pass on the steel he'd built in the war, but Eli only listened and nodded, never changed, just kept feeding horses with bare hands and fixing fences 1 nail at a time. It wasn't weakness, Walter had come to realize. It was something else, something quieter, something the town didn't recognize yet, but it would, soon. The flyer went up on the feed store's corkboard just past dawn, bright red letters stamped with Colton Reeves' name, like a brand on cattle. $5,000 cash, tame the Mustang in under 5 minutes, no rope, no cage, just grit. By noon, every porch swing in Summit Hollow was talking about it. The words moved fast, through gas stations, over coffee mugs, past weathered lips that hadn't smiled in years. A challenge like that didn't come around often, and not from Colton, unless he had something to prove, which of course he did. The Mustang had been caught near Devil's Bend, a rough patch of desert where most riders didn't bother to go. He was jet black with a streak of white down his nose like a scar. They called him Drifter, because no one could pin him down, not even the BBLM cowboys who brought him in bleeding and wild-eyed. Colton saw him once and decided to make a show of it. He built a pen in the middle of town square, not behind the fairgrounds or out at the auction ring, but right between the bakery and the barber shop where everyone would have to watch. Steel gates, thick dirt, and enough space to see someone get thrown hard. He said it was for sport, said it would bring folks together, but everyone knew Colton Reeves didn't do anything without an angle. They also knew he'd stacked the deck. The challenge was open to anyone, but the unspoken truth was this: it wasn't about taming the horse. It was about proving a point, that wild things couldn't be calmed, only conquered. That Colton's way, fast, loud, and forceful, was the only way that worked. Trucks rolled into town before the sun rose the next morning, cowboys with flashy belts, trainers with reputations to protect, old men who thought they still had it, and young men who didn't know they didn't. They circled the pen like gamblers at a pit fight. Inside, Drifter paced, eyes wide, muscles coiled like rope pulled too tight. He didn't rear or kick at shadows, he just watched, and waited. Eli stood near the edge of the crowd, his hands shoved into his pockets, eyes locked on the horse. No one noticed him, they rarely did, but his gut twisted as he watched Drifter's chest rise and fall faster than it should have been. Fear, not fury, a woman whispered behind him. That thing's gonna kill someone. Another chuckled. Colton'll get his show. They were right. But not in the way anyone expected. The first trainer lasted 12 seconds. He came in with spurs that jingled like warning bells and a rope looped tight in his hand. Drifter didn't flinch. Not at first, but the moment the man stepped too close, the Mustang exploded. Dust flew, boots scrambled, and the trainer hit the dirt hard enough to suck the air out of the crowd. Colton laughed, loudly, a showman to the core. Next, he barked, waving his hand like he was ordering another round. The second trainer brought a whip. The third wore a flak vest. The fourth brought arrogance so thick it could have been a saddle. None of them lasted more than a minute. Some were limping. One was bleeding. Drifter remained unbroken, his body slick with sweat and fury, his eyes scanning the growing crowd like he was counting every spectator as a threat. By the time the seventh man stumbled out of the pen, spitting curses and brushing off humiliation, the tone of the event had shifted. The laughter had dulled. Excitement had curdled into unease. And still, Colton grinned. He stood near the gate, arms folded, watching it all unfold like a king presiding over sport. But as the crowd grew restless, his eyes scanned the edges, looking not for trainers, but for a new kind of entertainment. That's when he spotted Eli. The boy was standing half in shadow, arms crossed, gaze locked on Drifter. Not judging, not frightened, just there. Colton's lip curled. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence," he said loudly, drawing eyes. The Colt whisperer himself. Eli didn't flinch, didn't speak. Colton stepped forward, raising his voice like a preacher. "Tell me, boy, what would your mama say if she saw you hiding back there while real men handled things?" A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, nervous ones. Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just watched the Mustang, carefully, as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. Colton's voice turned sharp. "You think soft hands and sweet nothings are gonna fix that beast? Come on then, show us." More eyes turned, some expectant, some doubtful. A few, just a few, curious. Eli didn't move. "Not yet," Colton sneered. "Didn't think so." Then he turned to the crowd. $5,000 for the man who can break that Mustang. Or boy, he added, pointedly, assuming he's got the spine. Silence followed. Eli's grandfather, standing just out of view, shook his head slowly, but Eli took a breath and stepped forward. Eli didn't walk like a challenger, he walked like a shadow, quiet, straight-backed, calm in a way that unsettled people used to noise. The crowd parted for him, unsure if they should cheer or sneer. Most did both. Colton turned, amused. "Well, look at that. The boy does have legs." Eli stopped just outside the pen. Drifter paced inside, nostrils flaring, hooves thudding against the dirt like a warning drum. "I'll try," Eli said, voice low but steady. Colton cupped a hand to his ear theatrically. "Speak up, son. You're not whispering to chickens now." "I said I'll try," Eli repeated, louder. "But I'm not doing it for money." The crowd stilled. Colton raised a brow. "Then what are you doing it for? Street cred?" Eli looked up, straight into the man's eyes. "If I tame him, you drop my grandfather's debt for the next month. No tricks, no delays." The air shifted. People turned to each other, confused murmurs blooming like weeds. This wasn't a stunt anymore, it was personal. Colton blinked, then laughed. A rich, mean sound that bounced off the storefronts like a slap. "You want to trade horse tricks for mortgage bills? You serious?" Eli didn't blink. "You said 5 minutes, I'll take 3. That wiped the smirk off more than a few faces. Walter Navaro pushed through the edge of the crowd, his face pale. "Eli, you don't have to do this." "I do," Eli said softly. "Not for me, for him." He nodded toward Drifter. Colton rolled his eyes. "All right, fine. You want your grandpa's name off my books for a month. You got it. But when that thing tosses you into next week, I expect the apology public." He turned to the announcer. "Start the timer when the gate closes." Eli stepped toward the pen. No saddle, no rope, no whip, only calm hands, steady breath, and something this town had never known how to measure: respect. The crowd laughed nervously, unsure whether they were watching a miracle in slow motion or the world's gentlest train wreck. But as the gate clicked shut behind him, and the dust curled around his boots, Eli didn't flinch. He simply whispered, more to the horse than the crowd, "Let's see what they never taught you." The gate clanged shut behind him, Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. The crowd, once a chorus of jeers and wagers, fell into a hush, uneasy, expectant. Eli didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge Colton or the stopwatch ticking in someone's hand. His eyes were only for the horse. Drifter stood at the far end of the pen, sides heaving, muscles twitching under a coat glistening with sweat and tension. His ears flicked back, then forward, watching Eli with the sharpness of something hunted too many times. Most trainers had charged in, tried to box him, grab the reins, show him who was boss. Eli did none of that. He took 3 slow steps forward and stopped. The air thickened. The crowd leaned in. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" Nothing. That was the point. Eli let the silence settle between them like a bridge slowly forming. His hands stayed low, fingers relaxed, body turned slightly sideways. Not a threat, not a challenge, just present. Drifter pawed at the dirt, snorted. His chest rose and fell like a drum, but he didn't bolt. Eli didn't reach for him, didn't demand. He just breathed, softly, calmly, like he had when his mother used to teach him how to approach the barn's most nervous filly. Let them come to you. Let them choose. The horse paced, circled, flicked his tail, but his ears were tracking Eli now. So were his eyes. The crowd grew quieter. Even Colton, arms crossed, mouth tight, said nothing. Eli dropped to one knee. A collective murmur rippled through the onlookers. "Is he praying?" someone muttered. He wasn't. He was listening to the rhythm of the earth, the sound of hooves, the breath of something wild learning what peace might feel like. The wind stirred. A dust devil danced briefly past the edge of the pen, spinning dry grass into the air like confetti. Drifter watched it, then looked back at Eli, still quiet, kneeling in the dirt, like he had all the time in the world, and something shifted. The Mustang lowered his head a fraction, just enough, just barely, but it was there, a beginning. No one clapped, no one spoke. The crowd didn't know what to make of what they were seeing. This wasn't showmanship. It wasn't dominance. It was understanding, and it was the first time anyone in Summit Hollow had ever seen it win. Drifter didn't charge, didn't rear. He just circled. Wide, slow arcs in the dirt, eyes fixed on Eli like he couldn't decide if the boy was a trap or a ghost. His hooves stirred the dry ground into soft clouds, each step deliberate, tense. Eli stayed where he was, kneeling, quiet, hands open in the dirt. He didn't chase, didn't flinch. He just breathed. In through his nose, out through his mouth, slow, steady. It wasn't a technique, it wasn't a plan, it was instinct, the kind you don't learn from books or broken bones, but from listening, from watching, from knowing that trust isn't something you take, it's something you're offered, if you're patient enough to wait. The crowd fidgeted, some were bored, some confused, others leaned in, unknowingly holding their breath, like they might scare the moment off if they exhaled. Colton Reeves leaned against the fence rail, his arms crossed tighter now. His smirk had faded into something colder, sharper. Because this wasn't going the way it was supposed to. There were no yells, no lariats, no dust clouds and bruised egos, just a boy and a Mustang, breathing. Drifter's ears twitched, his circles narrowed. He moved closer, not in a straight line, but in spirals, like the orbit of a wary planet drawing near to something unfamiliar. His nostrils flared as he passed, catching the scent of the boy. No sweat, no fear, just earth and breath, and something that didn't smell like danger. Eli didn't speak, but his presence did. It said, "I'm not here to break you, I'm here to meet you." And slowly, so slowly, Drifter began to believe it. His steps lost their edge, his tail flicked, not in alarm, but in thought. His breathing, once sharp and shallow, found a slower rhythm. Still, he didn't touch. He didn't approach head-on, but he no longer looked like something ready to flee. He looked like something listening back. Walter Navarro watched from the edge of the crowd, hat clenched in both hands. He saw it, that tiny shift, that unspoken language no one else had taken the time to learn. This wasn't taming, it was remembering. Remembering that before ropes and pens and shouting men, there had been space, and time, and the quiet. Eli closed his eyes for a moment, let the wind brush his face, let the horse come 1 inch closer, and he whispered, barely louder than a breeze, "It's all right, you don't have to run." Drifter stopped circling. He didn't run, not yet. A boot scraped the ground. A gate latch clicked. The shift was small, almost silent. But Drifter felt it before anyone saw it. His head snapped toward the noise, muscles tensing like a coiled spring. One of Colton's men, leaning too close over the rail, had moved, maybe to help, maybe to rush the moment. Either way, it was enough. Drifter reared. A scream broke through the crowd. Hooves pounded the earth, hard and frantic. The Mustang shot sideways, a blur of fear and fury. Dirt flew, people stumbled back, and someone shouted, "He's loose." Eli didn't move. Drifter tore past him, a storm of motion, eyes wide with panic. His body hit the edge of the pen and bounced off the steel gate with a sickening clang. The crowd surged backward like a wave breaking against the shore. Walter shouted something, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Still, Eli stayed rooted, his hands lowered, his breath steady. He turned slowly and faced the whirlwind. Drifter's chest heaved, his coat shimmered with sweat. His eyes darted from the crowd to the fence, to the open sky he couldn't reach. Eli stepped once, just once. No command, no demand, and then he whispered, just 6 words. "You're scared. I see you." The words didn't cut through the noise. They sank under it, into the dust, into the wind, into the space between one breath and the next. Drifter stopped. He didn't calm, not yet, but he stopped moving. Hooves stilled, ears turned, head lowered just slightly. Eli kept speaking, not loud, not forceful, just present. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to understand." The Mustang's flanks twitched, his mouth opened, then closed. Breath rasped through wide nostrils. Eli took another step, slow as sunrise. The crowd had gone oddly quiet, the way people do when they feel something they don't have a name for. No one shouted. Now, no one laughed. Even Colton had gone still. Drifter flicked his ears again. His front leg lifted, pawed once at the ground, and then hesitantly, warily, he turned to face Eli. Head on. No more circling, no more running. Just 2 souls in a pen full of dust and noise and expectation, choosing stillness. Eli's voice barely reached the fence, but the words rang out anyway. "You don't have to be afraid." And for the first time, Drifter looked not like a creature being chased, but like one choosing to stay. Drifter stood motionless, dust curling around his legs like smoke. The wild still flickered in his eyes, but something else had crept in, something slower. Not submission, not fear. Recognition. Eli didn't rush. He knelt again, same as before. He letting the stillness settle like a blanket between them. His hands stayed low, empty. No rope, no reins. Just the quiet trust of someone who'd waited their whole life to be seen, and now saw something worth waiting for. Drifter took a step, then another. Each hole was deliberate, like testing ice that might crack under weight. The Mustang's head dipped, breath huffing through his nostrils. His body was taut, but no longer braced for violence. He wasn't ready to bolt. He was deciding. Eli reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a cloth. It was faded, frayed at the corners, blue with tiny sunflowers stitched in thread that had dulled over time. His mother's. She'd used it to wrap carrots when she snuck them to foals too timid for hand feeding. He held it out flat on his palm, offered it, nothing more. The wind shifted, brushing Drifter's mane back as he leaned forward. His muzzle twitched, nostrils flaring as the scent hit him. Earth, sweat, something gentle, familiar in a way the world hadn't been in years. Then he did it. He touched, just the edge, just the smallest tug at the cloth, with his lips. But it was enough. The crowd, once restless, rowdy, ready for blood, was silent, not stunned, but reverent, as if they were watching something sacred. Colton's smirk was gone. His arms were still folded, but his grip on them had turned to fists. Eli didn't smile. He didn't need to. He reached out again, slower than breath, and brushed the tips of his fingers along Drifter's cheek. The Mustang flinched, but didn't pull away. Another choice, another trust. The cloth fluttered in the breeze, still between them, still connecting them, not by force, but by offering. Eli whispered, not for the crowd, not for Colton, just for the horse. You get to choose now. Drifter blinked, his body eased, for the first time since being caged, since being paraded like a prize. He stood not as a prisoner, but as something free, choosing to stay. And for the first time, the town of Summit Hollow didn't cheer. They just watched, quiet, humbled, changed. The clock was still ticking, a single hand on a cheap stopwatch, its rhythm soft but deafening. Less than 30 seconds now. Not that Eli noticed. Not that it mattered. He didn't glance at the crowd, didn't look at Colton. His eyes stayed on Drifter, who stood just feet away, head lowered, ears flicking, every muscle still alert, but no longer braced to flee. Eli stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees. One step forward, then another. His fingers trembled, just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a conversation. He moved beside Drifter's shoulder and paused, waiting for the signal that wasn't written in books or shouted across arenas. Only the horse could give it. A breath passed, then another. Drifter turned his head, eyes soft but questioning. He didn't move away. That was the answer. Eli placed one hand on the Mustang's withers, solid muscle, warm beneath a coat still dusted with sweat. Drifter didn't flinch. Another beat passed, time draining away, then calm as a sunrise. Eli swung one leg over. No saddle, no stirrups, just balance, just trust. For half a second, the whole world held its breath, and Drifter stood, didn't buck, didn't bolt, just stood, tall, steady, proud. A collective gasp surged from the crowd, sharp and stunned, like the first crack of thunder. After a long drought, people rose to their feet, hands covered mouths. Even the skeptics, the mockers, the ones who had bet against the boy with dirt on his knees and hope in his pockets, none of them made a sound, because the impossible had happened. Not through power, not through fear, but through stillness. Colton's jaw was tight, eyes narrowed, arms frozen across his chest, like he could crush the truth just by holding it in. But truth doesn't break under pressure. It rises, and right now it was sitting atop a Mustang once deemed untamable, ridden not with brute strength, but with grace. The stopwatch beeped. 5 minutes, exactly. A few people clapped, awkward at first, then more certain. Others simply stood, not knowing how to react, because what they had just seen didn't fit the rules they knew. It didn't make sense. It didn't follow the script. Eli didn't raise a fist, didn't shout, or bow, or celebrate. He just laid a hand gently on Drifter's neck and whispered something only the horse could hear. And the horse, this creature born wild and caged by men, let him stay. Colton shoved the gate open with a force that rattled the hinges. The applause had started to swell, awkward, unsure, but it died the second he stepped into the pen. His boots slammed the dirt like accusations, his face red with something more than embarrassment. "You think this means anything?" he snapped, voice slicing through the quiet, like barbed wire. "It was a fluke. The horse is tired. That's all this is." Eli didn't answer. He sat still on Drifter's back, one hand resting softly on the Mustang's neck. No gloating, no challenge, just presence. And somehow, that silence hit harder than any words. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't argue, but they watched, closely now. Not like spectators at a show, but like people waking from a long sleep. Something in them stirred, something they hadn't known they were missing. Because for years, Summit Hollow had followed a quiet rule: power came with volume. With fists slammed on tables and boots kicked through doors. It looked like Colton, sounded like him too. But not today. Today, the boy they had once overlooked, the one they'd dismissed as too soft, too strange, too silent, had done something none of them could explain away. He had walked into a ring meant to break men and made peace instead, not by forcing it, by offering it. Walter stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded over his chest, eyes wet but unblinking. He'd seen his share of broken things, and he knew the difference between a moment and a turning point. This was the second one. Colton stepped closer, but Drifter pinned his ears, just slightly, and Colton froze. That was all it took. Not a kick, not a charge, just a reminder. The horse chose the boy. Colton sneered, but his voice faltered. "You'll regret this, Navaro. You think they'll remember today? They won't. Towns like this forget real fast. But the people weren't looking at Colton anymore. They were looking at Eli, at the dust on his jeans, the steady hands, the way he hadn't flinched once, not from the horse, not from the crowd, and certainly not from Colton. Something cracked then, not loud, not sudden, but deep, a fracture in the old way. Because power, they realized, didn't have to be cruel. It could be quiet, steady, kind, and kindness, when chosen freely, had a weight no fist could match. Eli glanced toward his grandfather, then back at the horse beneath him. No words, no need. The town didn't erupt in applause. It just stood still, because something had changed. And for once, change looked like a boy no one had ever expected to lead. The pen was quiet. Too quiet. Drifter stood still beneath Eli, but his ears twitched toward the far side of the enclosure, where another Mustang waited. Smaller, lighter, but no less wild. Its coat was flecked with dust, its eyes sharp with the same panic Drifter once carried like armor. Eli felt the shift before it happened. Drifter turned his head, eyes locking on the lead rope tied tight to the fence rail. The other Mustang tugged once, twice, trapped, watching, waiting. Then Drifter moved, one clean step forward, then another, and before anyone could speak, could stop him, the black Mustang reached out with his teeth and bit through the rope. A single snap. Freedom. The smaller Mustang jerked back, stumbled, then bolted, and Drifter, still calm, still steady, followed, not in fear, not in chaos, in choice. Together they ran. Across the pen, through the broken gate, past the crowd too stunned to shout. Dust rose in golden spirals behind them. The sound of hooves, wild, alive, and uncatchable, echoed through the square. Someone gasped, someone whispered, "Let them go." No one followed. Eli stepped down from the fence rail where he'd dismounted, quiet, still, watching. He didn't smile, didn't cry, just placed the cloth back in his pocket and turned toward the road home. Colton's voice tried to rise, sharp, barking orders, but no one moved. Not his men, not the crowd, not even the mayor, who had stayed silent all day and now watched the boy with something like reverence, because it wasn't just the horses that had been released, it was the people, from fear, from habit, from the grip of a man who thought control meant strength. Eli walked past them all, boots soft against the dirt, head high, not proud, but at peace. Walter stepped beside him, eyes misty. He didn't speak either, just placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, and together they walked. Behind them, the Mustangs disappeared into the horizon, manes wild, in the wind, hooves carving a new path into the open land beyond Summit Hollow. There was no parade, no headlines, no brass band, only the quiet knowledge that something had ended, and something better had begun. The boy they had once called too gentle had left them no speech, no demand, no reward, only proof that gentleness, when chosen again and again, could change everything. And sometimes the loudest victories are the ones carried out on the wind. If this story stirred something in you about quiet strength, trust earned, and the courage to lead with compassion, share it. Let someone else remember that the world doesn't always need louder voices, just truer ones. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what power looks like and what healing can look like. Horse Tales of Wonder, stories that don't just entertain, they change you.